This content is about pessimism or negativity bias, and about positivity bias, and about cognitive distortions. So it's ironic that as I was wishing to add a slide to this content featuring Dr. Aaron Beck, who is the founder of our cognitive behavioral therapy, I came across the New York Times headline from this very day that he has died on November 1st from at the age of 100. And so it's kind of an interesting and nice tribute that this is the day that I'm offering you this bit of lecture on his content. So what he's left with us is we might consider him the father of cognitive behavioral therapy. He spent his career exploring depression, and in so doing, he developed the Beck Depression Inventory, which is still the most commonly used tool by therapists to assess the level of depression in the United States. And along with that, he understood a lot about depression, and he gave a lot of focus to the thinking that underlines this pessimistic nature or this depressive nature, and the way that thinking reinforces these depressive mindsets. And so we'll be looking at some of these distortions today, as well as some alternatives to those distortions. So cognitive distortions are just biased interpretations of events in your environment. And it usually comes from a tendency to view experience, to view the world around you and the situations that you're in through a dark lens. And also linked to a tendency to interpret neutral information negatively or see the worst that's possible. It is linked to depression. So people who are depressed tend to get into these habitual negative thought patterns, which reinforce the pathways for depression. So our thoughts, as we've learned in our behaviors channel, our thinking forges pathways in our brains that become potentiated the more we think them. So if we begin to interpret a situation in a negative way, that forms a series of neural connections in our brain, which then becomes our default interpretation modality for other events. And we can change these things through cognitive restructuring. It generally begins with just being aware of these distortions. And in a therapeutic setting, it would involve the therapist. It would involve very likely you describing some experience that bothered you, and the therapist helping you to see the distorted thinking that's underlying your reaction to the experience. And once we become aware of these patterns, we begin to interrupt them. And then we diminish the power of those neural pathways. And so that's cognitive restructuring. That's a part of the cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. That's one of the most common treatment techniques used today, at least in Western psychology. And so we'll go through some of the most common cognitive distortions, but there are many. So one common one is called filtering, and it means that we magnify the negative and ignore the positive. So imagine that you have an evaluation meeting with your boss at work, and she has all kinds of good things to say about you, 15 good things. And at the end, she suggests one area that you can improve. And you leave the meeting feeling awful, focused on that one area for improvement and ignoring all those positive comments that she made. So you can think of any examples in your own life or someone around you. Another one is black and white thinking. And so this is a tendency to think about yourself and the world in an all or nothing way. Like it's either got to be everything or nothing. And so you can see this person using words like always and never and any. I never feel happy. I don't have any friends. I'm always alone. I always feel sad. And a therapist would probably challenge this thinking. You always feel sad. But remember, when you showed me that picture of yourself holding your kitty, were you feeling sad then? Well, no, I wasn't feeling sad then. So then you don't always feel sad. That's the kind of processing that would take place. And an example of this black and white thinking, you imagine that you consider yourself a good writer, and usually you get A's on your writing in school, but now you're trying to write this paper and it's causing you trouble. It's just not flowing. You can't get the words out. You try, and eventually you give up. And instead of just saying, well, I guess this is just going to be a B paper or a C paper, you stop going to class, you accept an F on your transcript. If I can't get an A, then I'll take an F. And I know someone very well who has this habit. Overgeneralization is another example. This is taking one isolated incident and drawing a really big negative conclusion. So let's imagine that you finally speak up in class, you work up to it for a long time, it took a lot, and then when you say something, it turns out it was sort of silly, and the professor just says, and goes on to the next person. And so then you're going to take that one negative event and draw these big conclusions. I'm always saying stupid things when I speak up. Everyone thinks I'm a fool. Some of these overlap. There are so many of these distortions. Another one is mind reading. So this is inferring another person's motivation without evidence. And I always think this image is here because I think of non-response as being a really nice opportunity for people who have these tendencies to do some mind reading when you don't get a response. And very often that mind reading is worst case scenario. Still no response. She hates me, I know it. And so now this person has read the mind of the person who didn't respond and inferred that they were motivated by this dislike. Whereas, in fact, maybe they just don't like to carry their cell phone around that much. Another example is you ask your partner whether he would mind taking the dog for a walk that evening because you have a lot of work. And just for a moment he hesitates before he's about to say yes, but before he can even speak, you say, oh, I can see you don't want to do it. It's okay, I'll find time. So he's not even been given a chance. You've inferred his motivation. Instead of thinking, oh, he was probably just thinking about an appointment he has or something, something like that, you draw the conclusion that his motivation is to not want to do it, and now you probably have a little tension. Catastrophizing is the tendency to jump to the worst possible conclusion in every scenario, no matter how unlikely it is. And you can see this, the illogical leap from A to B, which is, man, I got a C on my exam, to point B. Oh my God, the world is over. And how did they get there? This person said, I could use my scholarship. That means I'd have to take out more student loans. That means I won't be able to buy a house. I'll never be able to get married. I won't have children. You can see how these illogical leaps brought this person to the catastrophe that is the world ending. Another example, here I am late for work again. This is the second time this year. This time I'll be fired. I know it. What am I going to do when I won't have a job? I won't be able to pay rent. I'll have to move back home. My parents don't want me back home. I'll be homeless. My car will be repossessed. I give up. I might as well just give up and quit right now. So another catastrophe, all in the head of this person. So blaming or personalizing, kind of two sides of the same coin. Blaming is holding others responsible for your pain. Look what you made me do. And we might say that if another person's actions are hurting our feelings, to blame them is inaccurate. We are responsible for our feelings, and we can choose how to respond to another person. And so to blame them for causing you feelings, we can tell them that their actions cause us to have feelings, but that is not their fault. That's something in us that causes us to react in that way. So blaming is considered a cognitive distortion. And likewise, personalizing, assuming that everything revolves around you, or that you are the cause of every problem. So taking responsibility for things that are not your fault, like this woman seeing her husband drinking too much, saying, I know he drinks because of me. If I was a better partner, he would not drink. I'm just such a crappy person, I'd drive anyone to drink. And so she's personalized the situation that may have little to do with her. And another example, this can happen sometimes, is interpreting this ambiguous information negatively. So here's this guy, but he's a stranger in the street. He walks by her, she looks at him, he glowers at her like this. And so personalization, again, is believing that others' words or actions are in some way related to you. And so she sees him in this frame of mind, and this is how he his eyes flick over her with this expression on his face, and she thinks to herself, oh no, why is this stranger glowering at me? I must be projecting something awful. He must see that this is how awful I am. This is why he's scowling. But you don't know this. Maybe he just lost his pet or his job or had a fight with his wife, or maybe he's just lonely and isolated. His scowl likely has nothing to do with you, and yet you personalized it and allowed it to bring you down. So that's this personalizing. Self-comparison puts you on a roller coaster of highs and lows. So comparing yourself with others and deriving confidence or depression from them, like either way you're reacting. So when you're one up, when you're doing better than others, you're just the bastion of confidence. And then when someone walks in who's a little better than you do that upward comparison, and now your mood plummets. And oh man, those guys are much cooler than me. That's just a little joke. But when we based our self-opinion, our self-esteem, our sense of ourselves on such comparisons, we're going to have a roller coaster of highs and lows that will always threaten to destabilize us. We'll never have our feet planted on solid ground. And the last couple that I'm offering here, there are many more, are shoulds and rightness. Like shoulds, maintaining a list of ironclad rules about how you and other people should act. Oh, I should want to go to this party. Oh, I should, I should get my dog out for a walk twice a day. I should brush my teeth after every meal. People should hold doors for other people. People should say thank you when you do something kind for them. My granddaughter should write me a thank you letter when I send her that blanket. All of these shoulds are just opportunities to make yourself feel bad when the shoulds aren't met. And so if you, like this person, held the door open, a kind person, this other person walked through without saying thank you. Now look how upset this person is. But his being upset is his own fault. And so this tendency then to allow this innocuous action of this unknown person to affect him in this way, that's the kind of problem that emerges from distortions. And likewise, rightness, always trying to prove that your opinions and actions are correct instead of humbly accepting that sometimes you're wrong. And so this is another example of a distortion that can cause you a lot of problems instead of recognizing that you're human and that sometimes you are wrong. And that even if you are right and someone else is wrong, sometimes it's not worth even mentioning it. And so this again can set a trap for yourself. So all of these are like extremes of thinking that get us into trouble. And I will be posting this video of Dr. Burns, who's a colleague of Dr. Beck, and he's going to explain these cognitive habits that are linked to depression very well. I can't play it in this recording, so you'll go into the site and look at this in a separate recording. It's about a 14-minute talk. Now we can engage in something called cognitive restructuring, which would be one of the functions of cognitive therapy. And that is just to change those thought processes. And so we can change those habits by not following them anymore, and then they'll reshape themselves in our brains. So we first just must begin to question these perspectives. Is it true that we should walk our dog every morning and every night, or would it be okay if once in a while we miss that? Is it true that people should say thank you? But is it okay if it doesn't happen sometimes? So we begin to just tamper down, just mellow out these strong cognitions that we have that get us into trouble. And these are some of the ways we can do it. We can ask ourselves, how do I know if this thought is accurate? What evidence do I have? Can I test my assumptions? Can I bounce these ideas off a trusted friend? Is this thought helpful? Are there other ways I can think about this situation? Am I blaming myself unnecessarily? Who or what else contributed to this situation? Is it really in my control? Am I overgeneralizing? Making consumptions? Here is a quick little quiz. that you can read through these examples on your own time and see if you can determine which of these distortions is taking place. And finally, we talked about a negativity bias, but let's also think about an optimism bias, which in some ways can have its own set of problems. It's also a biased and distorted lens. And so this is a TED Talk you may have seen before. I've shown it multiple times because she has such nice examples. 17 minutes long, so you'll watch this by going back to the link on the screen or download the slides and you can watch the linked video here. And so we'll see those two kinds of bias, what Dr. Burns talks about and what Dr. Ch07B talks about. And then I wanted to offer you some thoughts on this middle way. And so the mindfulness path that involves meditation, which is becoming dominant in Western psychology and always likely had a place in Navajo psychology, this is the idea of avoiding those extremes. Many spiritual traditions explore the potential of taking the middle road, avoiding the dualities, the highs and the lows, to reach a middle space. This particular quote says, from the Buddhist tradition, says, living in a fast-paced and stressful world, cultivate the middle way to experience contentment and composure, and connect with our inner peace and tranquility to enjoy a harmonious and happy life. And so this is the parable of the lute, which is a parable or a story about the middle way in Buddhism that you can watch on your own time. I'll put a separate link. And middle way is also represented in Christianity. This is an optional video. I couldn't find a really good shorter one, and so this is about 10 minutes long, but he describes how the middle way is present as part of the Christian foundation. And I ask you, who have more expertise than I do, whether you think that Hosho might also offer a middle way perspective. And I read this quote simply from a university web description, but it says, it has been said that Hosho may be the most important word in the Navajo language. Often translated as balance and beauty, the concept of Hosho carries with it an important emphasis on states of harmony. Hosho also emphasizes the many connections that link the ephemeral and changing parts of the world together in a larger, more persistent and significant whole. And so I wondered whether you thought Hosho might also get at this idea of the middle way.